For a king who restored a monarchy?
Rebuilt a nation, and redefined royal power, King Charles II left behind a legacy far more complicated than politics alone. Because behind the charm, the wit, and the crown, there was another story, one of passion, influence, and a network of relationships that quietly shaped the court. They called him the Merry Monarch, and for good reason, because no English king had so many mistresses or gave them so much power. This is the story of his life through the women who stood beside him, behind him, and sometimes controlled everything. It begins in exile.
In 1649, Charles was just a young man when his father,
Charles I, was executed during the English Civil War. The monarchy collapsed, the crown was gone, and Charles fled across Europe, moving between France and the Netherlands, living as a king without a kingdom. But even in exile, his reputation was already forming. He was charismatic, charming, and drawn to romance. One of his earliest known relationships was Lucy Walter, a woman who would play a crucial role in his early life. Around 1649, she gave birth to his first acknowledged illegitimate son, James Scott. This wasn't just a private affair, it was the beginning of a pattern. Because Charles didn't hide his relationships, he acknowledged them, he embraced them, and when he returned to England in 1660, restored to the throne after years of political chaos, he didn't leave that part of himself behind. If anything, it intensified. Now King Charles II entered a marriage meant for politics, not love. He married Catherine of Braganza, a Portuguese princess who brought wealth and alliances to England, but no children. And in a monarchy obsessed with heirs, that absence changed everything. Because while the queen remained childless, the king did not. Almost immediately, his court became defined by his mistresses. The first to truly dominate this new royal world was Barbara Villiers. By the early 1660s, she wasn't just his lover, she was the most powerful woman in England after the Queen. Bold, ambitious, and impossible to ignore, Barbara had multiple children with Charles. He openly acknowledged them, granting titles and wealth. She influenced political appointments, court decisions, and even foreign policy. Foreign ambassadors reported that if you wanted access to the king, you went through her. But power like that doesn't last forever. By the mid-1660s, her influence began to fade, replaced by someone very different. Enter Nell Gwyn. If Barbara represented power, Nell represented something else entirely. She was witty, charming, and came from a completely different world, a former actress, not an aristocrat. The public loved her. She made the king laugh. She spoke openly, sometimes even mocking the court itself. And unlike others, she didn't try to control him. She connected with him. Their relationship became one of the most famous in royal history, not just because of love, but because of what she symbolized. For the first time, the king's mistress wasn't just tolerated by the public, she was adored. But Charles didn't choose between women, he added to them. By the late 1660s and early 1670s, another figure rose to prominence, Louise de Kérouaille. Where Nell Gwyn represented playfulness and relatability, Louise was calculated and strategic. A French noblewoman with close ties to the court of Louis XIV, she brought something far more dangerous into the king's inner circle, foreign influence. Many in England believed she was acting as an agent for France, subtly guiding Charles toward policies that benefited French interests. Whether true or not, her presence created tension at court. Now the king's personal life wasn't just gossip, it was political risk. And still, he kept her close. At the same time, other relationships moved in and out of his life, some brief, some lasting, all contributing to a court that revolved around him in ways few monarchies ever had. Women like Moll Davis and Elizabeth Killigrew became part of the wider circle. Each had their moment, each had influence, however temporary. But what made Charles different wasn't just the number of mistresses, it was what he did next. He recognized their children, all of them. In total, King Charles II acknowledged at least 12 illegitimate children, granting titles, lands, and status. Dukes, earls, and nobles across England could trace their lineage back to him. In a system obsessed with legitimacy, he created a parallel royal family outside of marriage. And yet, despite all of this, he never had a legitimate heir. As the years passed, something began to shift. The energy of youth faded, the constant movement between relationships slowed. His later years were quieter, more controlled, but the legacy of his earlier life remained everywhere. In the titles he granted, in the families he created, in the power structures he shaped through relationships rather than rules. By the time he died in 1685, the image of King Charles II was firmly set, not just as a king who restored the monarchy, but as a man who redefined what it meant to rule. Because his mistresses weren't just personal choices, they were part of how he governed. They influenced politics, shaped alliances, and changed the structure of the royal court itself. And perhaps that's the most surprising truth of all. These weren't hidden scandals, they were visible, accepted, even expected. A system where love, power, and influence were impossible to separate. So when you look at the life of King Charles II, you're not just looking at a king with many lovers. You're looking at a monarchy built around them, and a man who understood something most rulers never admit, that sometimes the most powerful people in a kingdom aren't the ones wearing the crown. Which of his relationships surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe.